Hey everyone, my George Reeves Superman Rewatch podcast premieres Monday, September 19th, 2022. It's called Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman, and it's available now on all major podcast platforms. Be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more details about this all-new podcast series in this week's episode. Enjoy. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. Joining me to discuss the Unmade George Reeves movie, Superman and the Secret Planet, is the editor-in-chief of 13thdimension.com, Dan Greenfield. Welcome back.
Anthony, great to be here.
It's great to have you. I love that you wore a Batman shirt to a Superman recording. I'll let that slide. It's all right.
Yes, I did. Yes.
Now, we are here to talk about Superman and the Secret Planet. This was an unproduced screenplay written by Adventures of Superman writer David Chandler during the run of the show that was intended to be a big-budget theatrical movie and, of course, was never made. I actually have a question from one of my patrons, Brian, who said, "Did you read the online comic adaptation of the script?" Brian, boy, did we, because that's really what inspired this episode. There is this fan-made comic drawn by artist Randy Garrett that brought this unproduced screenplay to life, and it's available at jimnolt.com, this wonderful resource for Adventures of Superman. And
fabulous.
The reason why I even know about this, and the reason why I wanted you to be on the show, or one of the reasons, is that I learned of this comic adaptation, and by extension, the Unmade screenplay itself, through your website. You have a terrific article about it. I think the headline is, "Here's the Superman 55 comic that DC needs to publish." So walk me through how you came across this and how you got in contact with Randy Garrett, because you had an interview with him as well. I loved it.
Yeah, I have to tell you, it's been a few years since I published that. And again, I just couldn't remember where I came across it. It was probably somebody had mentioned it on Facebook or something, and I was like, "Oh, that's really fascinating." And I did a little digging, and like you mentioned, Jim Knowles' website, which is really a wonderful repository of information on this show. And it links, on the site is Randy Garrett's adaptation for this movie that, from what I understand, it was going to be made at the end of the series. I guess people were starting to figure it was time to move on, but it got shelved because both John Hamilton, who played Perry White, and George Reeves died within a year of each other. And so by the time they were ready to do this, obviously that was not going to be possible. But Chandler wrote a number of episodes of the series, and what I really enjoy about the adaptation is that since it is taken from the actual script, the cadence, the language, it all fits. If it really is the most authentic experience I've had so far in reading a comic book adaptation based on a TV show. Like the Batman 66 stuff was good, Superman 78, Batman 89. But even though Batman 89 was written by Sam Hamm, it feels completely different from what the movie was. This actually feels like an extended episode of The Adventures of Superman, and one with a much bigger budget. So it really is terrific. And it plays with all sorts of Superman background and backstory that the series really pretty much ignored. In a way, it's the first version of the Phantom Zone villains coming to Earth to try to take over. It shares DNA with Superman too.
Very much so. And you were previously on the show to talk about Superman 78, and we had a great conversation about that. And, in that episode, I talked about how typically I've been a bit averse to these kinds of adaptations, but Superman 78 really turned me around because, as we talked about it just so felt like the world that Richard Donner had created. You felt like you were hearing the voices of the characters. And here, it's the same thing, even more so, because like you said, this was written by someone who was writing episodes of the show. So it really pulls you right into that world. Quick side note, I just want to give a shout out to Sean Hendricks, owner of Fat Moose Comics in Whippany, New Jersey. You hear commercials for Fat Moose in all these episodes, but I wanted to give a personal shout out because on the note of Superman 78, when the hardcover came out a little while back, he sent it to me. I have the individual issues, but I was kind of toying with getting it because I was seeing everyone posting online, and the cover is designed like a VHS tape.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, that's really cool. And the timing was kind of crazy because late one night I was like, oh, maybe I'll order it. And I said, no, it's okay. I'll wait. And literally the next day it showed up on the doorstep from Sean. So
That's
shout out to
nice.
Sean. I proudly have it on my shelf here. And again, I bring it up because it really did go a long way, I think, towards making me more primed to enjoy something like this. And I really enjoyed it a lot.
Reading Secret Planet I wanted to see this movie. By the time I was done, I was like, this would have been great. And there's some great bits where you can really see, if they had the budget, what they would have been able to do. Now, of course, it still would have been late 50s, sci-fi kind of special effects. It wasn't exactly going to be, Stanley Kubrick, but, at the same time, it could have been, Fantastic Planet or Forbidden Planet. I don't know, because Forbidden Planet also has, for its time, pretty good effects.
Yeah, I'm with you. I mean, this would have been amazing to see. One of the great what ifs when it comes to Superman mythology generally, and especially Superman on screen. But I am immensely grateful to Randy Garrett and Jim Nolt for bringing it to life in this way. Yeah. Now, I've not been able to come across the screenplay itself. I searched for it online, and there were a couple of places where there were links to it, but the links were dead, or they went to a page that didn't exist anymore. I assume that Jim Nolt, those guys would have a copy. So maybe there's a way to get my hands on it. Have you ever seen the actual screenplay itself?
No, I haven't. The closest I have is reading the comic book that they have hosted at the site.
So it's 42 pages, and they're all available at the site. And it is, from all indications, a very faithful adaptation of the screenplay, except where noted, which is this extended epilogue that the guys created.
Right.
That really puts a nice button on both Superman and the Secret Planet, but also the entire series. I mean, really, if you're an Adventures of Superman fan and you haven't read this or weren't even aware of it, go to jimnolt.com, read it. Again, I think it's a nice coda to everything that came before. And sadly, as a fan of Adventures of Superman, you never got a proper series finale.
Right.
And this I think is very satisfying in a lot of ways, and it pays off a couple of long running bits on the show. So so it's very faithful, except with this epilogue, which actually added a lot. Like I really tip my hat to them for doing that. One other thing that I wanted to bring up is at the end of that interview, he talked about how he had heard from some folks at DC, like there was the sense from folks at DC that they were following this as he was putting it out, and that they liked it. There was positive energy, but it wasn't to the level of DC ever trying to put forth a Superman 55 comic, a la Batman 66 or Wonder Woman 77 or Superman 78 or so on. And that was actually one of the other questions from my patron, Brian. He says, rereading this made me wish we could get a Superman 55 comic too. Yeah, that would be great. I know you've written about this. So what is your take on this?
Yeah, that's not going to happen anytime soon. And the reason is, at first it was, a lot of these things were speculation. And again, going back to Batman is a lot of times it's all about likeness rights. That has a huge thing to do with it, with these comics. And if I go back to the Batman 66 comic and the Batman 66 merchandising that started about 8 to 10 years ago, and, bringing that show back to the fore, is that what you learned is a couple of things. First, it's all about the likeness rights. It's all about being able to get those. Now, the issue with George Reeves, it's not just that he died under mysterious circumstances. That's not the issue. The issue is whether or not there are any heirs out there. Now, the belief is that he did not have children, and that that wouldn't be an issue. But you never know if a niece, a nephew. And the only reason I know this is because Dan Desiato, when he was still running DC Comics, brought this up at a New York Comic-Con panel that I went to, because I had it written about, why they should publish this, and why not, and what is the holdup, and evidently, and at the time anyway, this was a number of years ago now, I don't know if it's still the case, but I think that it's pretty much standard where if a company or a publisher like DC, in something like this, since they're not sure whether there is an heir out there, they're not sure if somewhere, what they don't want to have happen is they print this thing, it becomes a big success, and then someone comes out of left field and says, I own 25% of that, or you had no right to do it. So they tend to stay away from places or images or likenesses for actors that they cannot affirmatively, get their, or their estate, get their signatures on a dotted line. So I think that given the way, how many years have passed and given everything that's going on with George Reeves, because he died, I mean, how many years now has it been? It's been it's been 60 some odd years ago that he died. I think it's highly unlikely that they would do it. Now, they could always roll the dice and see if anybody comes out of the woodwork, but this is a corporate way of thinking, and so they're not likely to take that risk.
Yeah, that all makes sense and is a reasonable explanation, and I can't disprove or dispute that. I guess, though, the cynical part in me wonders how much of a priority this would be for DC anyway. I never necessarily got
I don't think it would be a priority for them at all right now.
Yeah.
I mean, I really don't. It's the same thing. It's not just DC. It's Warner Brothers consumer products and what have you. There's never been a line of George Reeves Superman action figures. There's barely been a line of Christopher Reeve ones, for that matter. They've really just they've done a few of the characters, but I think when it comes to this show, considering that it ended in 1958, the market and the audience is shrinking by the day. It's just, we're guys like us, we're into it because we're really into this, but where DC's head is right now is that they're in a different direction. They are trying to reach a completely different audience. And while there's the occasional thing like a Batman 89 or a Superman 78 or even a Batman Scooby-Doo that plays to a certain, audience, or maybe they'll do what they're doing with the 30th anniversary of Superman, the death of Superman, where they're doing a little bit of that, but they have really shied away from doing a lot of the nostalgia stuff. It's all very, very focused on younger readers, new markets, trying to diversify the line, not necessarily in terms of characters, but the style of storytelling. And I can't blame them for that. A lot of people are deeply resentful, but I look at it and say, well, over 80 years, there's still plenty of comic books that I've never read and will never get a chance to read. So it's not like I'm running out of reading material. If it's not coming out every month, it doesn't bother me, because something I might read from 1963 is new to me, and that to me is sufficient. I understand from a business perspective why they've done what they've done. But then again, this is a company that's got brand new management, so who knows what direction they'll go in ultimately. Nevertheless, I would be startled if they did anything for Superman 55.
Same here. I don't disagree with any of that. I would just be happy if the Adventures of Superman series were made available more widely via streaming on HBO Max or whatever the new service ends up becoming, or if there were a new round of DVDs put out. Something like that would be great. Now, one more thing that I want to make sure that I share with everyone. Now, folks, if you've been following along on social media, you already know, but if not, let me break the news and share with you now. Very exciting. I am launching a George Reeves Adventures of Superman rewatch podcast. It's called Another Exciting Episode in the Adventures of Superman. It starts next week on Monday, September 19th, which is the 70-year anniversary of the airing of Superman on Earth. And it will drop every other week. So it'll be every other Monday. We'll put out a new episode, and we'll go through Adventures of Superman episode by episode, breaking it down, talking about each episode in the context of the Adventures of Superman series and also within the larger Superman mythology. I've already recorded the first two. They're locked and loaded and ready to go. I'm having a great time for as much talking about Superman as I do on this show, but there's still more to say, and it's a different podcasting muscle to flex on this, and it's been a blast. So it is its own separate podcast feed. So this is the important part. If you want to make sure that you follow along with another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, make sure you head on over to your podcast platform of choice, find the show, subscribe. There's a trailer out now. You can listen to that for a couple of minutes, and then make sure you tune in on Monday the 19th for our first episode. I am very excited to get into this, and alas, again, as the show is not as available as I would like, we're taking that into account. So as we're talking about these episodes, we're really taking you through them. So if you have the DVDs or you own them digitally, you have a way to watch them, awesome, if you want to watch along with us. But even if you don't, we are really going through them in detail. And so it's not a replacement for watching the show, but it's another way to experience the episodes, especially if you don't have the ability to do it. So I'm really proud of what we've been putting together so far. Zach from the Always Hold On to Smallville podcast is my guest for the first episode. Tyler from the Krypton Report podcast is my guest for episode 2. Dan, we got you on tap for an episode coming up pretty soon as well, which I'm looking forward to.
Oh, can't wait myself.
I grew up. This show was just kind of like wallpaper. It was on. I grew up in New Jersey in the 70s, and it was all New York TV stations. So I was well aware of the show, but I never really gave it much notice. But over the last few years, I've gone on a watch, and it's wonderful. It really is wonderful. It's not the same Superman that you see in the comic books, although it very much is at the same time. And I really, really like it. So when you offered me the opportunity to sort of talk in broad strokes about it with, in the context of this, I was very eager to do it. It's such a great show. It really is. And so I'm happy to be creating this place now where we can have conversations about it and hopefully, reignite some interest in it. Maybe for folks who hadn't fully delved into it before, this is an opportunity to, and for people who are very familiar with it, who grew up watching it and maybe, have been looking for an opportunity to hear discussions or even be part of conversations about it. That's coming. So I'm very excited. Another exciting episode in The Adventures of Superman starts next week. Now, going back to Superman and the Secret Planet, we'll go through the whole the story and the major beats and what stood out to us. But before our commercial break here, the art. I can't say enough good about what Randy Garrett was able to do here. I mean, what were your impressions of how he was able to bring these characters to life? It was
jaw-dropping in some respects. His George Reeves, whether he's Clark Kent or Superman, is on the money. He's got the body language down. He's got the tone down. He's got the actors look like the actors. In fact, it's full of character actors who were on the show, and you recognize them as you're reading. There's like a ton of them, and names who are a lot of them are quote unquote that guy actors that you saw a million times through the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Like for example, Tris Coffin is the guy who plays the main villain. He actually was in the first episode of Superman. Joy Lansing, blonde bombshell, has a guest appearance in this series. There are others too, including one of my favorites, who is let me see. Hold on, his name is. I always remember the character, but I don't remember his name. Oh, Leonard Moody, who played a number of characters on the show. Herb Vigran, who I'm sure you've seen before, he pops up, and so it's not only just his ability to do the main characters, but to add all of these Easter eggs of characters who probably would have been in the movie and quite probably in these roles. I thought it was a uniquely clever take on it, as opposed to just doing random faces.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, this was, I really put this in the same league as what, Wilfredo Torres did on Superman 78, where, you're looking at those pages and it looks like the characters, and hand in hand with that, the dialogue just captures the voices of the characters and the actors. So that it really works hand in hand. But yeah, just from a visual standpoint, you really just feel like you're in that world. It's very immersive, and it works fabulously.
And the story formula is very much like an episode of the show. It's just longer and more expansive because of a presumed larger budget. So they do things that they never really, there are only a few times. In a way, what it reminded me most of was the episode Panic in the Sky.
Yes. Because
it had that scope of, Superman going into space, and, mostly he was fighting, gangsters. And that sort of thing. He didn't really fight supervillains all that much. But here was an opportunity for them really to play with the Superman powers and abilities. He doesn't really do like heat vision or any of the other stuff that he never did that on the TV show either. But the set designs, or what the set designs might have looked like, and also just the sheer nature of the story, which, like I said, it reads like a very rudimentary version of Superman 2.
Absolutely. All right, let's take a quick commercial break, and then when we come back, we'll break down Superman and the Secret Planet. We'll be right back. Acme Comics is a locally owned and operated full-service comic book store in Greensboro, North Carolina, for people of all ages and walks of life. Since 1983, this 9-time Eisner Award nominee uses their collective knowledge and resources to connect you with the best material available. They pride themselves on their significant contemporary and vintage back issue selection. Mail order subscriptions to new releases are available, and all offerings are available to anyone, anywhere, via mail order. Follow Acme on social media and eBay, listen to the Acme Cast on all podcast services, and visit acmecomics.com for much more. Film lovers and filmmakers should check out this family of film festivals: Brightside Tavern in Jersey City, Hang On to Your Shorts in Asbury Park, Point Lookout on Long Island, and In the Cut in Bloomfield, New Jersey. I was fortunate enough to have my work shown at these festivals, and I found them to be very enjoyable and well-run events. Submission information for filmmakers, as well as details about the festivals generally, can be found at filmfreeway.com. Follow the festivals on social media for news and updates about events, discounts, tickets, and more. Also, be sure to listen to the Hang On to Your Shorts and Cullen on Film podcasts, available via a shared universe network. Fat Moose Comics is New Jersey's best and oldest comic book store. Established in 1982 and currently under new ownership, Moose sells a wide selection of new and old comics from every publisher, action figures, graphic novels, posters, statues, and more. If you're looking for something and they don't have it, they can probably get it for you. They know a guy. Visit Fat Moose in Whippany the next time you're in the Garden State, and be sure to reach out via the Fat Moose Comics Facebook page. Flat Squirrel Productions is an affiliate of BCW Supplies. The next time you need to restock on comic book bags, boards, boxes, and more, be sure to use promo code FSP, that's FSP for Flat Squirrel Productions, to save 10% on your order, and it helps support the show. Thank you. Aw Yeah Comics celebrates and promotes everything that is wonderful about comics, toys, artwork, and the joy they bring to people. Visit them in person at one of their 3 locations: Harrison, New York, which happens to be my local comic shop, Skokie, Illinois, or Muncie, Indiana. If you have children and have been looking for a family-friendly store, look no further. Join Aw Yeah for exciting events, including creator signings, how-tos, and more. Visit awyeahcomics.com and follow Aw Yeah on social media for more. Their name says exactly how they feel about it. Aw yeah. Before we get back to my conversation with Dan, I just want to share a few audio clips from past guest Rich Roney, who is one of the biggest Adventures of Superman fans I know. He and I spoke about Superman and the Secret Planet a little bit, and I recorded a few clips from him to sprinkle into the episode here now. So first up, Rich talks about his overall impressions of Superman and the Secret Planet.
This was so immersive, and it seemed to be such a labor of love. And I thought it was so true in tone, in artwork, in character depiction, in structure. It was so true to the TV series. What I loved about this story was they tapped into all the characters throughout the whole run of the TV series. I mean, towards the end of this story, there's a very hostile army general. And to me, that immediately struck me as Jeff Corey from Superman and the Mole Men. And I thought, wow, what a cool rendition, right? Because he was the very intolerant, hostile townsperson. And then to me, it was the same artistic rendition of that facial structure and design that was presented as this hostile army general.
Rich also shared his take on what was going on with another show around the same time that might help account for why there was this push and this desire to make Superman and the Secret Planet in the first place. Here's what he had to say.
I think there was a companion piece and a competitor to the Adventures of Superman. The Adventures of the Lone Ranger that ran from 1949 to 57. There was a Lone Ranger feature film in 1956. Then they had the final 39 episodes, the final season. Then they had another feature film of the Lone Ranger. Same audience, young children, a very wholesome hero, half-hour TV show, and the feature film took off like a rocket. I think that triggered the request for the script. And I hate to say it, I think they chose not to film it, perhaps because of the cost. You know, building the secret planet, building the sets for that. So I think the script was good, but I think they might have looked at the cost and figured, you know what, let's just go back and do another season. When I was a child in Chicago, Superman, The Adventures of Superman was in syndication. You were at the mercy of what the local manager at the station chose to display. I think if there were a feature film, it would have been released nationally. And I think it would have embedded more stuff more definitively into the lore and the mythos.
So my thanks to Rich for sharing his thoughts. Hope everyone enjoyed hearing from our good friend Rich Roney. And now back to my conversation with Dan. All right, so Superman and the Secret Planet, brought to life by this fan-made comic over 42 pages, including an added epilogue that the comic creators came up with. But in this story, we have this attempted global takeover of Earth by Kryptonia, this planetoid comprised of these Kryptonian scientists who survived the destruction of Krypton by creating these underground bunkers. And so they're floating around in space on this huge planetoid that's covered with kryptonite. And underneath, there they are in their atmosphere that's made to resemble Krypton. So later in the story, when Superman finds himself inside, he is powerless. And of course, outside there's kryptonite. So threats abound. What stood out to you the most about the story? What did you feel, worked the best? Were there things that you felt might have been missed opportunities? Like just overall impressions of this story. How well did you think it worked?
I thought it worked very, very well. And again, when I was done with it, it wasn't a case where I went, oh, that was fun. I was like, when I was done with it, I said, I would love to have seen this filmed. I think this would have been a lot of fun, especially with the sensibilities of the late 50s. I think it would have been a real kick. But basically, it's not just, surprise, there were members of Krypton who existed, but for, the main one, he's up to no good. And he wants to use this as an opportunity to take over Earth. And he is the one who has figured out that if we get to Earth, we're going to have superpowers too. And, there's more of us than there are of him. So we should be able to take him and then take over the planet. So instead of it being the Phantom Zone, it's what they call Kryptonia, which is this floating rock in space, which is, basically, like you said, scientific bunkers. There's also sorts of hokey, unbelievable sci-fi that goes with it, with a gigantic magnet that they use to push and pull things. But what kind of brings us into the story is that the President of the United States, who is drawn as Dwight Eisenhower in the story, which of course he would not have been in the movie, I presume, but he's kidnapped, or presumably kidnapped, because Air Force One is sucked into space. And what it is that he's sucked into space by the Kryptonians. And as we learned, the Kryptonians aren't all bad. There are good ones there who are against what's happening. But basically, Superman has to go, and because he's the only one, he's got to go and get the president back. So it opens up in a classic. We're at the Daily Planet, or actually Clark Kent gets home. And he's just gotten home from work and he's trying to take a rest. And then the next thing you know, he's called back to the office. And of course, while the inevitable sequence where he's Clark trying to figure out how to get away from everybody to be Superman, to do what he does, but he's frustrated by it. It's got all of those tropes that the TV show played with so well, only the added element of a substantial increase in the level of scope and the science fiction nature of it, as opposed to Superman breaking up some racketeers.
I think that's the thing about it that works so well, is that you do have all of those traditional familiar setups and dynamics with the core Daily Planet cast. So you feel right at home, but like you said, there is this whole other dimension to it, as opposed to, not to knock Superman and the Mole Men, for example, but right. That's a story. Yes, you're following Clark and Lois and they're on a story and you get the Superman action, but you don't get the rest of that, the Metropolis and Daily Planet setting that, is such a hallmark of the show. So here right. You really get everything, which is great. And you mentioned the fact that not all of these Kryptonians are going along with the ringleader Zonar. It's really Zonar and his head scientists who are really leading the charge here. And
which by the way, as drawn in the story, Zonar is the same actor who played Jor-El's foil in Superman on Earth in the premiere episode. and his name was not Zonar, but it has the 5 same letters just mixed around. It was like Rozon or something like that.
Yes.
So I don't know what that was all about, but it's basically the same character.
Yes.
And I think that there are other characters who are on the Kryptonian Council who are, it's hard to tell sometimes, who are drawn into this group. So you get the sense that the ones who were telling Jor-El to not try to evacuate went and evacuated themselves because they wanted to use this as an opportunity to take over the universe, which is also reminiscent of Superman the Animated Series and Brainiac's motivations as opposed to, what we've traditionally seen.
Absolutely. And that's so again, I love the fact that not all of the Kryptonians go along with this. I thought it would have been very easy to make this just a bunch of Kryptonians who aspired for world domination. But the fact that you had this group, and in fact, the majority of them who were really, backed into this by their leader. And when they had the opportunity to free Superman and then to save the president, right, they take him on the plane and Superman flies them out. I just thought that was such a nice touch and was a level of nuance that I wouldn't have necessarily expected, especially, from this in the 50s. I just feel like it would have been so much easier to not. So I appreciated the effort to show that not all of the Kryptonians had the same agenda. And you also see, because we find out that those on Kryptonia, they've been able to view events right through their viewfinder. So they've seen what's been going on Earth, and they see Superman.
I think they call it the Infinity Viewer or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And they talk, the good ones, they talk about how they have seen the example of Superman and that has been an inspiration. So I thought like that was really a really, really nice touch. And I appreciate that being included.
And the main, I don't know if rebel is the right word, is the actor who I mentioned before, who was Leonard Moody, Mudie, who played a number of characters on the show, including one of the best characters written on the show. It's from an episode that is not at all acceptable by today's standards, but if you've ever seen Drums of Death, he plays Dr. Leland Masters, one of the archaeologists, and he steals every scene that he's in that episode. And so when I saw that he was the one who was being given the role of, sort of being the good Kryptonian who allies himself with Superman, I thought was great because he's a really fun character actor.
Yes. It was so funny to me, so interesting to me that we get a little flashback to Krypton and these scientists going to Jor-El, who, as we know, and having just rewatched Superman on Earth, I saw it very recently, the traditional quintessential plea to the council that we got to get off this planet, we're doomed, and they laugh him off. But we find out in this flashback, a few of them went to Jor-El, and they're like, hey, we believe you. Yeah. We have an idea. Instead of rockets to go above, we want to go into these bunkers below. And Jor-El wants nothing to do with that. It's so ironic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny because they end up surviving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and of course, Kal-El survives, right? So Jor-El's idea was a good one, but it's one of those things like clearly Jor-El did not have the time to build the fleet that would be need.
Right.
Yet this was a viable alternative that he was so quick to dismiss. It was a very interesting twist to it. I thought that was great.
Yeah. And what I like is just not only just the distinction there, but again, it's how the evil ones are thinking, okay, this is an opportunity for conquest, where his was this is about survival, which is a totally complete 180 in terms of the points of view. But that's what informs the story.
Right.
One thing worth mentioning also, because you're talking about that whole scene, in addition to this comic, there is actually on YouTube a trailer that they did. Same guys did it also, where they took a bunch of clips from TV shows and different movies and basically constructed what a trailer for this movie might be like. And they cast David Hedison, who you may know as a character actor, very active in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Best known, I think, probably for playing Felix Leiter twice in the James Bond movies, and also for being in A Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, where I think he played the first officer. So he's very familiar. If you don't know the name, you'll know the face. but he's in the trailer. But anyway, back to what we were talking about as far as the distinction between Jor-El and Zoran, I guess.
Zonar.
Yeah, Zonar. Okay. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. Where Jor-El, in a sense, was right, but then he was wrong.
Yeah. I love that. I love that little twist. Now, there's a lot of, I don't want to say back and forth, but multiple rescue attempts made by Superman / Clark, right? So, like you said, the president has disappeared. President's vanished, right? That's the initial news report. Clark goes to the Daily Planet. He gets this call from the feds who know that Clark can get in touch with Superman, and he gets some more information that the Air Force One disappeared, right? The president's plane is gone. It just flew up and disappeared. So Perry sends the crew on a train to D.C. to get more information. Of course, Clark is like, I'm going to go sleep in my cabin. Don't disturb me. I cannot be bothered.
Do not wake me until the morning.
And, instantly changes to Superman and flies up into space to track where the plane went. And he comes across this planetoid and is instantly felled by the kryptonite, and he's immobilized. Right. He's on this asteroid and he can't move. And, cut inside to Zonar, and they activate their, I forget what they call it, the
their electromagnetic, whatever
Yeah, that's the thing that we find out, that there's this huge electromagnet inside, and they're using the magnetism to, pull the plane in and eventually to pull the planetoid to Earth. But anyway, they're able to repel Superman from the surface of this, and he returns, and he realizes he needs a different approach. So as Clark, he proposes this idea that he'll fly up in a plane and likely be taken in, but at least then be able to hopefully get a message out. Clark is going to fly the plane.
Right. Well, that was one of the great things about the show to begin with, is that Clark is not a pushover.
No.
He occasionally plays the mild-mannered dude or the aw shucks a little bit, but he's not Christopher Reeve's version of Clark Kent. And I think it's in the same way. I don't know how much you've watched the Wonder Woman TV show, the Linda Carter TV show, but it shares a very similar formula to what they did with Superman, because Superman generally will have two appearances. He'll be early in the episode or early-ish, so that there's a little bit of action, but his main part of the episode is usually at the end. The last 10 minutes, the final act is where you get it. But in between, the writers had to make the characters interesting as civilians. And in doing so, I think from a movie standpoint, it's easier to make Clark this bumbling kind of foolish guy. But if you make him that way in a TV series, I think it would get old pretty fast. So they make him this really capable, very, very determined reporter. And I really like that version of Clark. And so this idea that I will sacrifice myself potentially for the good of the nation, and I'm going to do this alone, and all this kind of stuff is all very Superman stuff. But at the same time, it's not completely out of character for the Clark Kent that we've seen on the TV show, which I think they also established can fly planes.
Yes,
he was a pilot.
Yeah, we did see that on the show as well. And no, I agree with you 1,000%. And I think you look at Adventures of Superman, and then you look at Lois and Clark, the new Adventures of Superman. And, in both instances, I mean, it is a very capable Clark. And yes, in the latter case, we are dealing with the post-crisis Byrne version. So we had a shift in the comics anyway. But still, I think you're right. If you're going to be dealing with these characters on a weekly episodic basis, you can't rely too much on Superman, I think, probably from a budget and technology and story standpoint, right? Like if you're ultimately creating a Daily Planet show, which these are, I mean, essentially, you have to have a more capable Clark. And then you definitely see that here. Of course, Lois and Jimmy stow away on the plane that Clark is flying, and Clark pretends to fall out and perish so that he can now enter as Superman. And they're all taken. And it is this great moment where, this is now the first time Superman's inside this planetoid and realizes very quickly he doesn't have his powers here. Right, he's inside.
He gets into a fight and he gets his ass kicked.
Yeah, and Lois gives him a hard time about it. She's like, "Superman, you weren't even trying." It's like this guy was throwing punches. What do you want? That was harsh.
Yeah, and of course, Lois. I just also like the classic. He's going to go alone, and of course, Lois and Jimmy stow away. I mean, if that isn't classic Lois and Jimmy, it's why is the plane shaking apart? And it's like, what are you doing here? And then, of course, he has to fake his own death. And, but it's true. But Lois gave. Well, she didn't usually give Superman a hard time, but she did give Clark an awful hard time on this show.
Yeah, Yeah. So, and Zonar is giving his ultimatum to the world leaders, and everyone's considering, and they really have no choice but to capitulate, right?
Right.
And Kryptonium makes it to Earth. He frees Lois and Jimmy to deliver this news, and they go back to the planet. And Superman is eventually freed by, again, one of the good Kryptonians, and comes up with this idea, right, to have this protective suit made, right? It's this combination of, he goes to this plastics factory, and it's a combination of lead and plastic. And so he has a suit that will now allow him to survive the effects of the kryptonite on the outer part of the asteroid to get inside, which is great.
And it's also, and I don't know if this was specified in the script, but it's translucent. So you could still see him through it in his outfit. It's not like it's a astronaut suit and he's unrecognizable. It's basically, he's still Superman, just in a, see-through plastic suit, which of course is very 1950s. But I appreciated it. I like the fact that, they again took it an extra couple of steps than they might have on the TV show.
Yes. And, it calls to mind the lead suit from Superman, the animated series, that he would wear to protect him from kryptonite.
Exactly what it reminded me of. Yeah.
Which I never really liked. And especially I recently went back and I rewatched almost the entire series. And I get it. I get I understand, but I don't know. It just makes it's like too, I don't know. Too easy at a certain point if you could just wear the suit, but it's all right.
Right. But then again, I would have loved to have seen the Supermobile show up in this movie too. So
yeah, that's right.
The Supermobile would have worked out well.
Supermobile. So funny enough, just as a very quick side note, a week ago, I put out an episode on the Justice League Power Rangers miniseries, because I've also now launched a Power Rangers podcast. People are like, what is it with this guy? All these podcasts. I like podcasting. What can I tell you? But in that episode, we talked about the new McFarlane Toys reissue of the Superpowers figures. And in that episode, I talked about how I had not, at that point, procured the Supermobile, but I'm happy to update everyone because I know everyone's probably waiting. Oh, is he going to get it? Is he going to get it? I'm looking at it now. It's up there on my shelf. I was able to, it's a Walmart exclusive. You can only get it there. And it finally was, I don't have one near me, but I was finally able to order it online. So I'm looking at it now. I had never owned the original one, but I have the Supermobile now, proudly on my
It's great, isn't it?
Yeah.
Have you opened the box? Have you actually pulled it out?
Yes, I have. So I also have the main figures. I got the Superman, Batman, Darkseid. And those remain in their case because, of course, you can see the figures. But with the Supermobile, if there were a clear display, I probably would have left it. But I was like, I got to see this thing, so I took it out.
It's great. It's great, and the arms work really, really well. It's a toy, and that's the thing. It's not just a collectible; it's a toy. We digress, of course, but it did cross my mind when I was watching this. I'm like, man, Supermobile would have been great here.
Yeah. Now, we'll get to the big climax of Superman showing up in the lead suit and everything that unfolds there. But here's the thing. I don't disagree with you. You definitely see how this is far beyond the scope and scale and budget of the regular episodes, of course. At the same time, and I think this is a credit to the screenplay, and this was, you and I said the same thing when we talked about Superman 78, where you read that miniseries, and it felt like something that could have been filmed by Donner in the 70s or 80s, right? For the most part.
Definitely.
And that was one of the things that I think worked for us with that miniseries, was that it felt like, okay, this wasn't so far beyond what we could have seen on screen.
Right.
And I think here, for the most part, and I think the key to this for me is, like you said, it is reminiscent of Panic in the Sky when Superman has to stop this asteroid. And, in that episode, look, the effects are a little rough, but you see him flying in space. You see him going later in the episode. You see him land on the asteroid, and it's clearly just a rocky area of California. But it works well enough, and so I felt like there was somewhat of a template, something that you can look to in the show to have kind of an idea of like, okay, I could envision something like this, and also the fact that he's powerless. A lot of the action here takes place in the bunker where he's powerless. So we avoid, for the most part, having to have an actual super-powered battle here.
Right.
So it definitely felt, again, bigger. And you're right. I mean, more sets. I mean, this would have been, beyond what the show was typically doing, but in a reasonable sense. Like, I could have seen this, especially if they had the time and they had the budget. You could have seen something like this brought to life. So it still felt that's the thing. It still felt in keeping with the show, which I appreciated.
Well, having a writer from the show doing it was, I think the key part of that. I've had some conversations with folks, and again, as I always bring it back to Batman, if you look, the best comparison I can make is the 1966 Batman theatrical movie versus the TV show, which it is, some people say, oh, I find them so different, the tone's so different. I'm like, no, the tone is exactly the same. It feels like an extended version of an episode, but with all this extra stuff that you just wouldn't get. You get a Batcopter and a Batboat and a Bat Cycle, and you get the Penguin sub, and you get, all sorts of cool stuff that, that you just didn't get on the show. But it still feels like it's very much part of that world. And I think that that's what made me appreciate this story so much, is the fact that it wasn't like someone trying to make it like that. This was what the show was like. And going back to where we were in the story, it was also a very smart move that you can keep Superman on screen for a longer period of time, but he doesn't have his powers. So it's an inherent conflict. It's inherent, there's added tension. So it's good from a storytelling standpoint, but it also gives you plenty of Superman. It's not like the TV show where if you're counting 25 minutes on-screen total, it's probably 20 minutes Clark and 5 minutes Superman, or maybe a little bit more. It's more balanced here because you at least get to see him in space without power. So he has to, he can't just simply rely on his abilities. He has to rely on his wits.
Absolutely. And so you do have that dilemma, that conflict, that tension. I do wish from an emotional or personal standpoint that there would have been more of an opportunity to mine what he must have been feeling over the fact that people from the world that he thought was totally destroyed were actually still alive and had these malicious designs towards his adoptive world. There's just like not real estate for that here. And again, you look at the show, and the show wasn't built for that either. So I get it. But again, with 2022 eyes looking at it, like that's one of the things I would have loved to have seen something there.
Yeah, you would have thought that, especially the quote unquote good Kryptonian ringleader, you would have thought that at one point Superman would have asked, what was my father and my mother like? What were they like? Can you tell me a little bit about them? And that's the kind of thing that you would see, and sort of actually did see, in the Superman 78 comic, which is a much more emotional journey, for lack of a better term. But that is also the difference between storytelling now and storytelling 60 some odd years ago, particularly when it came to adventure stuff. Nobody thought of Superman as having an emotional, he had issues that he had to resolve, and he had, a conflict in his life, but he wasn't what you would call an introspective guy. You never got the sense of him being they never played up the lonely aspect of what it means to be Superman, being the only one of your kind. The Superman of the TV show is very, very comfortable in his own skin.
Yes. And look, and I've said this before, I like the different flavors of Superman we've gotten over the years. And yes, in recent years, looking at Clark's journey on Smallville, looking at the Henry Cavill version of the character, like these were versions who had a lot that they were wrestling with. And I identified, that resonated with me, but I also really love the uncomplicated George Reeves Superman, who's Superman, and this is what he does. So, I think for the most part, it's not something that I was typically longing for, but just here, I guess it just felt like such a missed opportunity, because it's like, wow, you're actually introducing this element that's been, with the exception of Kryptonite, has been totally absent from the series. And it's like, now we have this to play with, and it's really not, with one little exception. I'm jumping ahead here, but when the good Kryptonians decide to leave because they realize that Earth will never trust them the way they trust Superman, who grew up there and is now one of them, and they decide to leave and follow Superman's example, but elsewhere, there's one panel. It's literally one panel where, and then the caption says that Superman has a brief moment of contemplation as they leave. And so, but you know what? Like, that at least is something. And I would have wanted more of that, but I appreciated that. There's at least this moment of like, oh, I could have, and I guess in your headcanon, right, you can fill in the rest of what he would have been thinking there. So that went a long way for me. I think if there were any missed opportunities in this whole thing, I think that's it, that we were getting into territory the show didn't, in terms of Krypton and Kryptonians. But it just felt like from an emotional standpoint, there was just nothing really there.
It's interesting too, because in the comics, they actually were going down that road. People often forget that, like in the Mort Weisinger years, there were a lot of times where Superman's Kryptonian heritage was a huge part of that version of the character. And often that idea of being the last Kryptonian, or the last son of Krypton anyway, once they started introducing other survivors. But it was, they did have episodes where he met his parents, and they were emotionally driven stories. And even if they were a little ham-fisted, given the storytelling styles of the day, they did touch on those areas. But yeah, it's nothing that the TV show ever, I mean, the TV show really does exist in its own universe. You get Krypton in the first, episode, but it's very much Superman on Earth. And, the kryptonite is introduced on the show, but it's used very, very sparingly. And it's actually a rare case where there's actually something of a continuity, where in one episode he disposes of some kryptonite, and the next time it pops up, it actually makes references to how he disposed it last time, so how they were able to retrieve it and stuff like that. But here, you're right, for the scope of the storytelling, it's still very much in that kind of sci-fi storytelling, square-jawed, unemotional style that you did see in the late 50s and early 60s before things started to get more complex in terms of, film storytelling, which really was, you're talking the late 60s.
Totally. So, now we get to our climax here, where Superman returns in this see-through lead suit, right? And he's able to make his way in, and fighting ensues, and there's a hole now that is allowing Earth's, sunlight and atmosphere to come in. So now the Kryptonians are starting to develop powers. Superman and the good Kryptonians are able to get the president out onto this plane, and Superman flies them out. But Zonar, this guy's not messing around. And I don't think we mentioned this before, but he is merciless throughout. He's destroying trains and bridges and, over the protestations of the other.
He's General Zod.
Yeah. They're like, well, Earth is surrendering. Like, we don't have to do this. We're going to land soon. We're going to get out. We're going to have powers. And he's like, no, I have to send this message.
Yeah.
And so the coup de grace is this atomic explosion that he initiates. And this is probably, this was the one thing where I was like, oh, how would they have done this?
Yeah.
Again, I can imagine the asteroid, because we had seen that, but this was like, all right.
Well, I imagine they would have used stock footage of, atomic weapons testing, because that did exist by this time, obviously. And then they probably would have somehow superimposed Superman over it and then reversed the footage. I'm guessing there would have been a version of that, but I don't know. Yeah, who knows? And who knows what kind of budget they would have gotten to do this.
Yeah, no, but I think that makes sense. But he's able to create this, fly around it and create this vacuum that is able to counteract the effects of this atomic explosion, though it leaves him irradiated with this atomic radiation. But conveniently, there's going to be a kryptonite blast as the planetoid explodes, because Zonar's pushing it too hard, juicing it with too much power, and it explodes, and there's all this kryptonite radiation. But thankfully, the atomic radiation and the kryptonite radiation counteract each other, so Superman's good to go. And then we get that scene that we were talking about a second ago, where the United States military, they're ready to fire on the Kryptonians, and the president and Superman, they're able to talk everyone down. But it does lead to this very, again, I appreciate it. It's like a very unexpectedly bittersweet moment of them leaving.
Mm-hmm. See, I figured that they would go, because that is something that, you had to preserve Superman as the only one of his kind in his world. You could not introduce and they've done this in the comics too, periodically, when they have like Kandor or what have you, and they let Kandor grow on its own. And then what would happen if there were other Kryptonians on Earth? And of course, it never goes well. But I think that was just simply, again, in those days, you had, if you were going to start the story, at the end of the story, you had to fit the status quo of the beginning of the story. And so I think that was something that I wasn't entirely surprised by. But at the same time, I thought it was effective storytelling. And just taking one step backward, it also did remind me the whole sequence that you described of the explosions and the radiation and the atomic bomb, and then you've got the blowing up the Kryptonia and all of that, reminded me very much of the climax of Superman the movie, where it's really a chance for Superman to cut loose and do big set pieces, which again, they always had, with the exception of episodes like Panic in the Sky, they generally had to keep it contained to their budget. Here, they had an opportunity to show you Superman really super. And I appreciate not only that in the story, but I also appreciate the way the comic book conveys that. the pacing of the comic in and of itself works very, very well as a comic. So I don't want to just look at it as something that just simply translates the script. The comic in and of itself is very well done. It's very well executed.
Well said. I agree with all of that. I was also thinking, I don't know if you're current, so I won't spoil it, but the end of Superman and Lois season 2, it also kind of called that to mind a little bit. I don't know if you've been watching.
No. You know, I haven't been in such a long time that Oh, you mean the new show?
The new show. Yeah.
No, I haven't been watching.
Oh,
sorry.
I recommend. No, it's okay. But I really recommend it. It's so good.
Okay. I you know what? I'm so far behind on so much of my TV watching. My wife and I were talking the other days of whether it was time for us to begin Better Call Saul. So, you know, that just goes to show you how far behind we are on certain programs.
My wife and I are still talking about when we're going to find the time to watch, and don't hate me, Breaking Bad. So.
Oh, well, wow. Okay. So then I don't feel so bad.
No, it's okay. We watch a lot. We've watched
That's
a lot.
Great show. Yeah. Oh, it's great.
But we'll get there. But anyway, you know what? I agree with you about, needing to sort of, return to the status quo. What was unexpected to me was that they lived and left. I would have, reading the story, I didn't think that this is going to end with Superman and the good Kryptonians flying around Earth and palling around. I wasn't expecting that, but I thought they would have to sacrifice themselves, or Zonar would take them out, or something like that. So, which, would have been sad in its own right and bittersweet in its own right. But I really liked this angle here. And, clearly, this movie was never made and nothing else ever followed it. But if it did, I don't know, this would have been out there. I don't know. Maybe something could have been explored. I doubt it would have been, but it would have been some new element that was added and was out there. So
sure.
I thought it was a great choice. And then we get to our epilogue, our added epilogue. We have the rest of the screenplay, right, where they're all back at the Daily Planet, and there's a note, on the website that says, the second panel of this page is where the screenplay ended, but we felt like we wanted to add a little bit more. So then we get into this extended epilogue, where there's going to be this big parade.
But before you do that, the one thing that's worth noting is that where the script does end is really classic Adventures of Superman. I mean, they didn't have him winking at the reader, but they would have probably in the movie. But yeah, it kind of just ends on a gentle joke or a gentle little comment and, fade out. And that's how so many episodes ended. So I agree with their decision to expand upon that and say, well, actually it needs a better, peppier ending. And I think for the most part it works. So
I agree with you. It's like I said, it's a great wrap up for this story, but also a really nice coda to the series. And so there's this big parade, and the Daily Planet staff and Superman are all going to be awarded here and celebrated. And so, of course, this creates a problem because Clark can't be both Clark and Superman at the same time. So it seems. He'll work it out as we see. But this creates a bit of a dilemma for him. What I liked here, and this goes back to what we were saying before. A lot of familiar faces at the parade, and throughout the story there's we see Sergeant O'Hara in the story, who had been in the Mrs. Superman episode when she had to pose as Superman's wife.
Yeah, that was Joy Lansing. Yeah.
So that was terrific. Miss Bacharach gets mentioned, at least the long-suffering secretary, aka administrative assistant at the Daily Planet. Of course, we see Henderson, the scientist from Panic in the Sky. We see him earlier on, right as he's looking up, and then in the parade here, you see Pepperwinkle, you see Professor Lucerne. So you see so many of these faces throughout the story, and also in this epilogue, and it's like all the pieces of the show coming together. It'd be beautiful.
It's a love letter.
I love it. Yeah, it really is. It plays like that, and it's great. This leads to one of my I think this is just such a terrific payoff to the long running bit in the series of Lois trying to figure out or trying to prove that Clark is Superman, and ultimately Superman or Clark he excuses himself, and then Superman shows up, right? And Lois is convinced. He's like, well, that proves it. They're not both here. Clark left, Superman shows up. What did you think of what did you think of what Lois does in that immediate aftermath? Where she tries to cover for Clark.
Oh, well, I thought that was fascinating.
Yeah.
And it was on a dime. The idea being that and you know what? I imagine that's probably would have happened. Once she got the information, rather than expose it, she probably would have done exactly that, where she all of a sudden has an epiphany. It's like, well, wait a minute. We have to protect him. he's Superman. You know, we have to keep this secret. And it's such a funny, unexpected way. I mean, in a roundabout way, it's sort of what ended up happening in the post-Byrne years when they decided to, have her find out who he is, and they got married, and that became part of it, where she does have to protect his secret identity. The great irony of that. But the way they did it here was, I just love that idea that knowing Lois, knowing who she is and knowing who Jimmy is, that if they did find out, they would be, oh my God, we found out, ha ha ha, we proved it, and then they'd be like, oh well, we better protect him. He's Superman. We can't tell the world about this, and I like that. I thought that was very sweet.
Yeah, that to me was pitch perfect. Like that just felt so true, and was just such a fitting payoff. Yeah, so organic. It's like, there would be that moment of satisfaction of like, aha, like I finally got him. I could finally prove it. And then, that instinct to protect immediately comes in, because it's like, of course. I mean, even though, yes, maybe there is some sense of betrayal that he has been, fooling them all this time. But at the end of the day, Clark's their friend, Superman's their friend, their ally, their protector. So it's like, it's natural, organic, like you said.
And I think that they, given the way that show developed, and I think the way it is in most of the time, a lot of times they'll show, like, I think my recollection was that in the comics, when she finally did learn who he was, she was upset with him about it or something. And in my feeling is, I think that what Lois here does, that instant understanding of why he had to do this. He wasn't looking to be dishonest, but he would, and this is all unsaid, but feeling the wheels turning is that, anybody who has seen both of them up close for as long as they have, I don't think they would be as upset by it. I think they would immediately understand that the reasoning was that he was trying to protect them. So their instinct to protect him for it, I think, makes all the sense in the world.
Yeah, and I also think, you look at, whether it's the comics in the 90s or the Lois and Clark TV show, where, Lois, she has some feelings about it when she finds out. But one big difference in both of those cases is that she and Clark were engaged in a romantic relationship. So there was that whole other layer here, but you don't have that here. So I mean, like, I think this is perfect. Like, this makes absolute sense. And I love this. This was, again, a great payoff to this long running bit in the series. But then, to Lois's surprise, Clark shows up, because we find out that Clark was able to split himself in two, a la the classic episode Divide and Conquer. So it's a great callback to that episode of the show, even though personally I am not a fan of this business that he's able to split himself into.
Well, no, of course not, because it's Deus Ex Machina. It's too convenient at the end.
But
it's like I had to chuckle when it happened.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing. In the context of the show and that Divide and Conquer episode, I'm like, oh man, I've always felt like, look, he has more than enough powers. We don't need to add more. But to the comic, to Jim Nolt and Randy Garrett's credit, look, this exists in the canon of the show. So it was a great callback. Right. And I really have to tip my hat to them, because they made it clear this is the last time he's able to do this, right? Yes. It's not easy for him to do. And he's like, all right, once we fuse, like, that's it, we can't do this again. So I like that they called back, but then they put it to bed. Perfect. It's a great finish.
Mm-hmm. And it also plays into that, again, returning it to the status quo of the beginning of the movie.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say about Secret Planet that we didn't get to?
No, just that I highly recommend it. I mean, you can see, it's reading a comic book. You sit and spend a half hour reading it or thereabouts. It feels like you're watching an episode or watching a movie. I mean, the time it takes you to read it is about the same time it would take you to watch an actual episode. So it's not like you're reading something that takes an hour and a half or hour and 40 minutes to play out. So it's tight, it's well done. But it's just, it's fun. And it's a sweet, the whole thing is such a knowledgeable, passionate, like I said before, love letter to the show and the characters. It's not just a simple matter of the fact that they read the script and translated the script. These people know the show. They know it. And the references, and I knew that there were Easter eggs in there and actors that I couldn't immediately identify. But I imagine, and there are also people in there who I think were probably their friends also, because you see all other sorts of faces that look a little bit more modern, people with longer hair and beards and stuff like that. So I would love to see a key all of the walk-ons in this comic to see who they really were. So it's whether you want to wait till the entire season of watching the show and then reading this, or reading this and then watching, either way, you're going to be highly entertained. And when you would ask me to do this episode, I was like, yeah, that'd be cool, because that's different. It's just not talked about enough. So I appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you taking the time. I appreciate the article that shared this in the first place, and I'm sure it put it on the radar of a lot of other people as well. So thank you for doing that. Thank you to Jim Nolt and Randy Garrett for creating this, for bringing the screenplay to life. It's really fantastic. And look, tying this all together, for a number of reasons, I don't think we'll ever see the Superman 55 comic that a lot of us would like to see, but there's this, and man, it's really tremendous. So if you're an Adventures of Superman fan, I urge you, it's free. It's on jimnolt.com. Go check it out. Superman and the Secret Planet. I hope everyone.
I'm sorry.
No, you please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, and that is the key, is that it's free, which is why they could do it, because there's no money that changes hands. So, basically they're able to do this without having any kind of, running any kind of problems with DC or the lawyers or anything like that. It's free. So it's basically fanfic, only it's not. And it's that's the thing that's, it doesn't cost you a dime. You can just sit down and read it and have a good time.
Absolutely. And I'll put the link to this in the show notes as well, so it's a little easier for people to get to. I hope everyone also checks out 13thdimension.com, which is Dan's site, and follow on social media. There's the 13th Dimension Facebook page and 13th Dimension on Twitter. Is there anything else that you wanted to plug or direct people to?
No, not at all. I mean, like you said, the anniversary of the show is coming up, so we've got something planned, as you well know, but your readers don't yet. The one thing that's worth, I'll throw one last thing in, is that I don't know if you go to sleep with the TV on or off. I'm the kind of person who likes to go to sleep with the TV on, but one of my go-tos is this series, especially the black and white episodes. There's just something really soothing and nice about going to bed with this on in the background. And so this has become, over the last, say, 3 or 4 years, a real part of my life that had only kind of been in the background for years. So I came late to the show, but I love it, and I love this particular treatment of it. So no, that's the only thing I have to add.
Right on. Oh, like yourself, I came to this late as well. I didn't grow up watching this. I saw episodes here and there, but it really, I guess, didn't make that formative an impression on me. But when I did my huge viewing for episodes of Digging for Kryptonite last year, I just fell in love with it. And so here we are now. So thank you, Dan, for taking part in this. Thank you, audience. And really, if you want more Adventures of Superman talk, I hope you will join us next week for the all-new podcast series, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, Monday, September 19th. And we'll be back here on Digging for Kryptonite with another all-new episode next Tuesday. We're actually going to be continuing this theme, right, of comic book adaptations or continuations. Next week, we're covering the Smallville Season 11 comics. So it's going to be a lot of fun. Nice. Make sure you check out all of that next week. And until then, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. Support the show and receive exclusive additional content, including my DC Movie Rewatch podcast at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato. Thank you to all patrons for enabling me to produce this show. Also, be sure to explore the other shows within the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, which is home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the Adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, all hosted by yours truly. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts. Visit flatsquirrelproductions.com for more. Thank you all.